Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Habari za leo.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the Africa Centre for Cities, Our Future Cities,
Surge Africa and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre,
We are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2023 Action Festival.
Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers
to inspire action for sustainable cities.
This is the third edition of our virtual festival.
it brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent.
This year's theme is The Cities We Want.
the cities we want.
the cities we want.
The cities we want.
This mirrors the African Union 2063 Agenda vision, the Africa we want.
It is a wonderful Pan-African call for transformative change.
However, the agenda does not adequately embrace urbanization as a potential positive force for improving prosperity, inclusivity, and environmental well-being on the continent.
We need more emphasis on the role of cities and local action. And this festival aims to provide inputs into this agenda.
The cities we have are
Expanding,
incomplete,
inventive,
contested,
facing impending crisis, yet brimming with potential.
The cities we want are
people-centered,
Safe and healthy.
beacons of culture,
unflinchingly modern.
And adapting to change and leading global innovation.
We'll make these cities through
Experimenting,
learning
collaborating,
and amplifying the everyday actions of people who are shaping their cities.
The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing,
It invites you to forge new partnerships,
Experiment with new concepts and ideas.
to seek ways to bridge science, business, policy, and the arts.
Together, let's enter this space in the spirit of poetic possibilities.
The cities I want, I already have. In people, all of us children, mommy's sons and daddy's daughters, not raised ideally, but we're still proper. Carrying dust of townships on our skins, unwashable identities and unsolvable complexes, crisscrossing each other with dance, loving where hatred has tried, succeeding where governments have failed. I see monuments in these lives standing here, deities to be worshipped after now, each one gods in their own rights, kings and queens of the yellow and black. We live here together, synchronized dreamers in a city that never sleeps. If there is still one person left grinding on the streets, when you write about a place like Lagos, we do not convolute the language. Come meet us where joy has found us, on the streets where art has found voice, in dance theaters raised on canals, and open mics staged on wooden bridges. I found my cities here, in the people, full of life, each one a road rager, each one a mouthful of curses, each one a mouthful of blessings, each one a hand full of blessings, because that's how it ought to be.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Ingrid Kutsia. I work for ICLEI in the biodiversity space. And it is my great pleasure today to welcome you to this session of the Rise Africa Festival. We are talking about creating an enabling environment for mainstreaming, nature-based solutions and climate change, and specifically looking at insights from African stakeholders. So the welcome is to all of our speakers, our distinguished guests, all of the attendees, all of our panelists, all protocols reserved. And I am now going to just give you a very short overview of the session. And to do that, I'm going to just step back a little bit and tell you about what we've been doing the past decade, in the sense that we've seen a significant rise in funding and investment towards creating an enabling environment, particularly for mainstreaming both climate change and nature-based solutions in our African cities. Globally, we are seeing that funders, practitioners, and institutions have strengthened their investments, redirected their resources, and provided extensive skills training towards the interventions, the targeted policies, institutions, and communities. More recently, with the growth of a whole of a society approach that we found in the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework adopted in Montreal last year, we see that there's a greater need to address developmental changes, and society is waking up to the value and to the need of mainstreaming a gendered approach in climate change adaptation, as well as far as using and applying nature-based solutions. However, there are still some important questions that remain, most importantly being who benefits from these interventions, who is impacted, and who is involved. In this session, we're going to be featuring a dialogue of the perspectives from a diversity of African stakeholders across different elements, including women, practitioners, community members, and traditional leaders, to understand how creating an enabling environment has benefited or negatively impacted them in the last few years. Stakeholders are drawn from across several projects that have focused on generating enabling environments. These include ICLEI's Urban Natural Assets for Africa program, as well as the Conquer Design Initiative, or KDI's Kibera Public Space Project, and Realizing Urban Nature-Based Solutions projects, which will be introduced shortly. Before I start, however, I just need to get some housekeeping rules off and introduce also our speakers. So firstly, just for those participants to remember that we are keeping your mics muted and your videos off during the webinar. The session is being recorded, and so by participating in the session, it means that you are giving your consent to being recorded. If you have questions, please post them in the chat box. You can do so throughout the session. If you need to, or would you like to have a specific speaker respond to a question, then please just indicate that in the chat box as well. And then I also just remind everybody to keep your eye on the chat box, because we are going to put in the bios of our speakers there, as well as important links, and give any other additional information. And if you've asked a question, it would have been responded to in the chat box as well. So with those housekeeping rules behind us, it is now my great pleasure to just quickly run through the session outline. We're going to now introduce the speakers. We'll have our overview of the host projects. You can see there are the 3 projects that I referred to just now. Then we're going to have a very important panel discussion, and we have some very esteemed panelists taking part in that discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A session. We'll bring it all together, and then we will close it. So this is going to be a really exciting and innovative learning experience and sharing experience for all of us. It's my time now to introduce to you our speakers, so you can meet our speakers for this session today. First of all, we're going to have a short overview of the 3 projects. This will be done by Bongiwe Simka. She's a professional officer, and she works on urban nature and nature-based solutions here at ICLEI Africa. We are also joined today by Franklin Karimi from KDI, who's also going to be talking to some of the projects, and then Regina Opondo, who is a senior community principal at KDI as well. And then as far as our panelists are concerned, I would like firstly just to, by paying credence to learning in more authentic ways and onboarding Indigenous knowledge systems, I am very honored and delighted today to have on our panel a highly esteemed traditional leader, Nana Kwesi Ejin II. He is the Nymphaean of the Ogoa traditional area in Ghana, West Africa, and I hope my pronunciation pleases you, sir. Your presence here today, sir, is testament to the fact that enabling environments are only created when we embrace mutual learning and pay attention to the key role that Indigenous knowledge has to play in climate change adaptation. So on behalf of ICLEI, as well as our partners, KDI, we welcome you to this esteemed gathering here today. Our other panelists are Dr. Amanda Odoi. She is the Principal Research Assistant at the Center for Gender Research Advocacy and Documentation at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. And then we have Regina as well, who will have met as one of our speakers. Our last panelist is Marion Rono, who is a Chief Officer of Housing and Urban Renewal from Nairobi City Council. We have a truly very well represented African panel here today. I'm going to hand over now and open the floor to our speakers. They will set the scene to our session today by introducing the three projects, and then we will also have a short video before we move on to our panelists. So I ask our panelists to just bear with us for a moment, be patient, and let me hand over to my colleague, Bongi.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. I hope everyone can see me and can hear me properly. As introduced, I am Bongi Simka, and I work for ICLEI Africa within the Urban Nature and Nature-Based Solutions team. And I'm part of the Urban Natural Assets program as well, which I'll be speaking briefly on just now. Sorry. Okay. So the Urban Natural Assets for Africa, UNA for short, is one of ICLEI's long-standing flagship programs. So the program aims to support local governments in Africa to protect and to revitalize the urban natural assets by integrating nature-based solutions into city planning activities. So the program is funded by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, through SweetBio, and has been spanning implementation for almost a decade now. It started in 2014 and is currently in its third phase, UNA Resilience. And in that period, the program has been implemented in 10 African cities across 8 countries. So as mentioned earlier, the current phase of UNA is the UNA Resilience Project, which I'll be speaking about just now. So building on the work that's been done in UNA over the past few phases, UNA Resilience aims to transform development trajectories for African cities towards those that improve sustainable development of and the interconnectedness with the surrounding natural systems along 3 interlinked pillars, namely governance, planning, and finance. And we do that by building urban resilience, creating sufficient agency, and a momentum of unfolding process of transformative change at a local level. The current phase of UNA is being implemented in 2 cities, namely Bo City in Sierra Leone and Cape Coast in Ghana. And unlike the previous phases of the UNA program, this phase is anchored specifically in a human rights-based approach, which cuts across all the pillars and all the activities in the program and ensures that human rights and gender considerations are mainstreamed into nature-based solutions and climate change activities. So in the context of the UNA Resilience Project specifically, creating an enabling environment has taken a lot of different forms, one of which being through research. We kindly noted, acknowledged the lack of data in a lot of African countries. And one of the things that have been key in project implementation was research, bringing bridging those data gaps. And we've done that by developing spatial maps and creating spatial data, where we did spatial mapping of urban natural assets across the project cities. What natural assets exist in the cities, where are they, and in what condition are they in? And we also moved on and embedded elements of socioeconomic understanding in that research by conducting socioeconomic surveys. Those surveys were done across, I think, about 900, at least 900 households in each city. And the aim of those surveys was to kind of understand, to assess and understand the socioeconomic landscape and the livelihood dependencies. And because of that, we now have a better understanding of the intersectional vulnerabilities that exist. We have a better understanding of human rights, gender rights, fulfillment, access, and participation in the context of biodiversity and climate change adaptation at the city level. And we also have a better understanding of the livelihood dependencies on natural assets. What natural assets are key in driving the economy? What natural assets are key in driving people's livelihood on a day-to-day basis? And we've also been able to find more information and data around access to opportunities and funding to enhance this community resilience at the local level. And also through our research, we have a better understanding now of the legal and of the current legal and policy landscape, and have been able to identify entry points to strengthen the inclusion of nature-based solutions, human rights, gender, and nature considerations. Another way in which we've been able to create an enabling environment is through our learning labs. So our learning labs are our co-creation, co-production engagements, where we create this platform and which is quite inclusive, bring in different stakeholders for knowledge sharing and participatory learning. Through these learning labs, we've been able to build capacity of city officials and civil society to better understand the value of natural assets beyond just extracting resources and goods from them. And we've also been able to empower communities a lot and to build agents of change in their own lives, in their own cities, and to be better able to advocate for the fulfillment of their human rights, specifically the right to a healthy environment. And because of this work and all the other initiatives that I can't mention at the moment, we've been able to come up with targeted and contextually relevant responses, which are guided by the data that we've collected through the research and through the community engagements that we've had. And these include being able to develop a lot of tools and resources that help support the mainstreaming and learning process beyond the learning labs themselves. These include posters, infographics, and having a lot of activities, including one we just recently held where we had a photo voice activities where people are given the opportunity to continuously learn about nature, urban nature, and the value within the context of their cities and in building resilience. And also we've been able to enhance biodiversity finance mechanisms, which is one of the key things the project is focusing on this year. Just noting a lot of the gaps in terms of biodiversity funding and biodiversity financing, especially at a local level, trying to drive those kind of mechanisms. How do cities leverage financial resources, and how can they drive the interventions that they have at a city level? So that's part of the work that we're doing moving forward. And then lastly, we've been able to incorporate a lot of youth voices in the nature-based solutions and climate change discourses, mainly through an event that we hosted a month or so ago, where we brought together a lot of youth from the different schools in both our cities and created a platform for them to engage in this kind of discussions and better understand climate change, nature-based solutions, and how they fit into their day-to-day lives and the value of these things in sustaining their livelihoods. I think I'll end there. I could talk a lot, but I don't really have a lot of time. I think more information on the project will be posted in the chat, so everyone is welcome to look at the website and find more information on our UNA project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bongi, for that. And we just have a short technical announcement to make here. So I'm just going to hand over to my technician to just make that announcement, just in relation to showing the slides. Do you want to just quickly...
Yes, hi there, everyone. Just a short announcement for our next presentation a bit later on in the session. When presenting your screen, to make sure that everyone can see your slides clearly, please just remember to hide your Zoom toolbar that appears at the top of your screen when presenting. There should be three dots, ellipses on the far right of that toolbar. And when you click on them and go down in that menu, there should be towards the middle of that menu an option for hiding the Zoom toolbar.
Thank you, Luca. Otherwise, we have blocks like we do at the moment. So our next speaker, we're going to ask Regina, you're up next, and you're going to talk to us about the Kibera Public Space Project. Over to you.
Actually, we've taken some liberties. So Frank will start off, and somewhere in between, I will talk about KPSP. so that he does an overview of the work, and then I'll just jump in and talk a little bit about KPSP and continue into the panel discussion to address some of the issues. So Karibu, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you, Regina. I hope I'm audible from your end as well. I think, thank you for sharing this giveaway as well. I think we can start by playing the video, the KPSP, and that will also set the scene for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sharing the video now.
When it rained, it would be very difficult for us to even sleep because the flooding will get into the houses.
So let me try and share it from the beginning. Technology seems to be defeating me at the moment, but let me try and do it. I'm a millennium. I'm supposed to know how to do this. So I'm just going to try and prove myself right in the moment before I embarrass an entire generation.
There you are. That seems to be good.
Okay.
When I was growing up as a little girl, one of the challenges that we had was infrastructure. The houses that we lived in were not very safe. When it rained, it would be very difficult for us to even sleep because the flooding will get into the houses.
Kibera is one of many informal settlements in Nairobi. They're not well connected to their electricity grid system. They don't have well connected and distribution of water. Looking at the services that are already there, the roads, the sewer, or the water, it's not enough to serve the population in Kibera.
The general concept behind KDI is how they work with the people, how they plan with the people, and how they support the community to solve their challenges.
The story of KDI is interesting. It stems back to early 2006. We were 6 graduate students at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. What KDI really stands for, I would say, is really around the productive public space. Really around how can you have good public space, how can you provide some economic sustainability, but also how can you provide environmental sustainability, and really begin to build up resilience of a space that people can own and then begin to defend as their own.
So KDI has created a number of sites. There are 11 in total, and they spread across Kibera.
The sites have solutions that cut across from sanitation facilities to gathering spaces, open spaces, play spaces for kids, and also solutions to environmental challenges such as flooding.
Hii site ina provide toilet choo, maji wa bafu watu wanaoga, all kama uko na shughuli ya all una rent, unakuwa hapa. Kiosk pia uko na kiosk 2 ambao moja ilikuwa ya vijana wana program ya wimbo, CDs, whatever walikuwa nafanya, ingawa sasa hivi wameenda shule. So imebaki tu kiosk, lakini inasaidia watu kwa wengi. Sababu hata nafasi ni nzuri watu kukaa. Watu walikuwa wanapanda sukuma, wanapanda nini. Kitambo watu walikuwa wanaenda huko juu kwanza ukitaka kibiriti ama ukitaka kitu kama unga.
The model serves as a way to empower people in the grassroots level to collaborate and effect change. It shows that you can make low-cost interventions with high impact in an upscalable way.
Tuko trust yenye iko, tuko na trust kabisa kutoka kwa KDI kwa sababu most ya projects zenye tunafanya hapa ama programs zenye tunafanya hapa sio hao wanatujisaidia, sisi ndio tunaamua.
The whole idea was that you go in and work together with the community, work together with policy and government, and that really began to build trust.
I've seen so many organizations that work in Kibera that do not do the work the way KDI does it. This work is transformational, this work is saving lives, and this work is what needs to happen to ensure that Kibera is a place where children, women, and everyone else can thrive.
Thank you very much. Can we hand over to our two speakers? I think it's going to be you first. All right, off you go. Thank you. I'm not picking up any audio. That's better. Yes, now I can hear you. Thanks, Franklin.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that button was hiding from me. Thank you for that, Bongiwe, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to share from KDI about our work. I'll be joined in this presentation by Regina, and we'll be sharing from two of our projects. That's the Kibera Productive Public Space Project, and also the Realizing Urban Nature-Based Solutions Program. I'm a senior design associate here at KDI, which is a design and build international nonprofit that started here in Nairobi in one of the informal settlements called Kibera. I'll start off by sharing quickly about our work and then hand over to Regina to proceed and just sharing a bit more on the video that we've just seen from the Kibera Productive Public Space Project. So KDI is a nonprofit, an international design and community development organization that applies participatory planning approaches to deliver community-led physical and non-physical interventions within the vulnerable communities that live in informal settlements, but also in refugee settlements, as we've recently started to work in. And in all these communities, we work to contribute to advancing equity and social justice. In the 16 years of being around, we've been able to partner with communities, not just in Kenya, but also in Tanzania and in Latin America, among other regions, led by a multidisciplinary team of experts in planning, in design, engineering, but also as community experts. Our service area is cut across 4 main areas, but today I'm going to touch on 3 of these, which are research and test, design and build, and also advocacy and educate. And in the projects and the program that I'm going to share today with Regina, we're going to see how we've engaged communities in co-design and implementation of various nature-based solutions and green infrastructure solutions, while also testing the approaches to scaling and influencing uptake of the green infrastructure practices, while we also provide on-ground practical evidence and knowledge on the application of these solutions, especially for urban informal settlements, but also African cities. I'm going to then allow Regina to share more on the productive public space.
Okay, thank you. There's not too much to say when you've seen the video, but I think for us as KDI, KPSP is our flagship project. It's where we started, and I think where a lot of our learning and our other programs then find their grounding. So KPSP for us was a response to the disenfranchisement and the injustice you find in places like Kibera, informal settlements like Kibera, where access to basic things like public space or even just a space to sit and be may not be available, is not thought about, is not planned for, and yet is a very needed requirement. I think the only thing that I'll add, because a lot of that you've seen in the video and some of it is in the slide, is in particular our approach, which one of the speakers in the video talks about. And the approach that we have found and now has become a pillar of our work sits on 3 particular legs, if you take the traditional stool. So the first is participation, working with people and not working for people or trying to force ideas onto them, recognizing that they understand the challenges, they often have solutions to those challenges, and working with them to identify and prioritize and then build solutions around that. The second is around integration. So of course, as KDI, we are also a multidisciplinary firm. We're a multidisciplinary firm, so we have different disciplines. You have community workers, you have landscape architects like Frank, engineers. So bringing all that knowledge and all that skills together to work with community knowledge and expertise jointly together to then deliver solutions for the people. And then the third is networked change. So making sure that you're connecting people, ideas, opportunities, institutions to each other to then have a holistic response to the challenges that communities are facing in places like Kibera.
Thank you so much, Regina. Okay. Yeah, I think. Seem to see. Thank you so much, Regina. So I'll proceed to looking at the other project, which is the NBS project. But a bit of a background to this is that from the KPSP projects that we've built so far, the 11 of them in Kibera, it sort of helped us start to think about where and how we can integrate nature-based solutions and green infrastructure solutions. We did study all the 10 sites, looking at the 3 life cycles of the projects from concept all the way to operation. And we started to assess through various factors and looking at what influences the success of green infrastructure components applied in all these projects. So that sort of formed the basis of how we got into on the NBS projects. And we looked at where are the opportunities for NBS in informal settlements. One of the things is that there are limited examples of nature-based approaches in informal settlements in Africa, which presents an obvious challenge in terms of acceptance, not just by residents, but also by the powers that be. But also, we found an opportunity that if we can start to build this knowledge and build practical evidence, then there is an opportunity to bring in NBS into informal settlements. And this helps us think about and act differently in terms of the mechanisms to advocate and also implement nature-based solutions in informal settlements. As a broad sense, the NBS program is broken down into 4 components. One is on the core design and build aspect, which helps us build the practical evidence, and we'll be looking at some of those examples. The other one is also conducting a robust MEL framework to study and understand the performance of the NBSs, and also how the approaches sort of contribute to the uptake of NBS. And also thinking about scaling, not just spatially, but also in terms of the other stakeholders who then impact and also contribute to the uptake of NBS. So far, we've worked since 2019 within 2 cities in partnership with CCI in Tanzania and our work in Nairobi. And this has been supported by Swedbuy. So we built within 2 sites in Nairobi and 2 sites in Dar es Salaam. We were able to build quite a number of nature-based solutions, some of which are handle stormwater and also rainwater, but also interventions that helped us develop, using local knowledge and expertise, develop like appropriate technologies that can be accessed and also maintained within the local residents and the users. We're also in the second phase of this, and we are now also in another settlement and doing the same thing where we develop the designs with the communities through an engagement process and develop the designs for implementation. So far, the objectives of this program have been to provide robust new practical evidence backed by data that we collect through the MEL framework, and also find methods of uptake and scaling for the NBS in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, and also transfer this knowledge to other regions and cities in the continent. And through this, also contribute to disseminating to residents and also sharing knowledge between the local authorities, policymakers, and also academics.
Frank, can you just wrap up, please, in a minute? Thank you.
Yes. So I'm just sharing some examples of that from a recent completed project. Thank you. I think the last thing I could say is also that we've seen that residents in poor neighborhoods are often underserved in community development decisions, and that involving them right from the start would help with the uptake of nature-based solutions as well. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I'm sorry I had to cut you short. It's just that I know that we've got a panel, and I'm sure everybody's waiting to hear their insights as well. We're going to move across now to our panel, and I just want to thank our three speakers for setting such a lovely scene for us. And I've already introduced the panel, but allow me just one thing. I understand that the esteemed Nana Kwesi could not hear us earlier, so I'm going to welcome you again, sir. And just to say that what I said just now was that by paying credence to learning in more authentic ways and onboarding Indigenous knowledge systems, we are really delighted to have you on our panel today as a highly esteemed traditional leader, Nana Kwesi Ejun II, the Nyam Fehen of the Ogua traditional area in Ghana, West Africa. And sir, I hope I am using my pronunciation correctly. Your presence here today, sir, is certainly testament to the fact that what we're trying to do, creating enabling environments, can only create when we embrace mutual learning and we pay attention to the key role that Indigenous knowledge has to play in climate change adaptation, especially in our continent. So on behalf of ICLEI Africa and our partners KDI, sir, we welcome you to this panel. And with that, I am going to kick off. We have a general question for everybody. First of all, the question that I'm going to ask, and I'm going to start with Nana Kwesi, is what value have initiatives like nature-based solutions and working with nature had in your city?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear.
Thank you and good afternoon. I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Coming into contact with your organization has really exposed us to so many things that we didn't really take into consideration. UNA project coming into our community has given us a lot of insight as to how to take care of our natural resources in the wake of climatic change. Most of our communities didn't know much about these things, so we're doing things anyhow. The first two meetings has really given us a lot of exposure. And we think if we are to carry on with what we are doing, get our stakeholders, which is the government and then the municipal assembly, all on board, we can help change the narrative now. It has also given us the opportunity to come into contact with the power brokers in our community which is the opinion leaders, our queen mothers, and then our local folks. Currently, we are in talks with the municipal as to how to curb some of the negative aspects, which is we have one of the nicest lagoon in Cape Coast, but a lot of pollution, plastic pollution, e-waste is all being dumped into it, creating unemployment for our fisher folk, at the same time, not getting good water to do farming. Coming on board has really given us a lot of exposure, and I think going on, we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Regina, I'm going to ask you a question next, Regina. As a practitioner who works directly with communities and also other practitioners on the ground, do you feel that you as a practitioner has the relevant skills to mainstream nature-based solution and climate change considerations in the fulfillment of your mandate as a practitioner? Regina?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So for me, I feel that as a practitioner, I'm still learning. I get new skills every day, but I am lucky because in the team that I work in, they're experts like Frank here. So those that work from the side who have more experience around community organizing and social development, we are able to work very closely with experts who then help us to learn. There's something Frank talked about using language, and I think language is one of those things that we should think about moving from jargon and technical language and adapting it to what communities we work with can relate with. So speaking generally, I think the skills and abilities of practitioners working with communities and particularly on the ground vary, of course, depending on their training, their experience, and the specific context in which they operate. While some might have relevant skills and abilities to mainstream nature-based solutions and climate change adaptation considerations in their work, some of us require a little bit more support and capacity building. And some of us are even in the supply side, so in the government side. So mainstreaming this would then involve integrating some of those concepts into various aspects of decision-making, planning, and implementation processes. And of course, therefore, requires an interdisciplinary approach, which is why I was talking about the three pillars that we use as KDI. So just listing, I think very quickly, some of the things that we could think about is one, technical expertise and building capacity on that for the relevant people so that they have a solid understanding of principles and concepts. Two, stakeholder engagement, widening the tent and working effectively with diverse group of stakeholders where the issue of language then becomes very important. Three, strengthening capacity on both demand and the supply side. So while you build the technical competency, also build the capacity of communities to demand, to participate, to make decisions. And then, of course, integrated approaches, policy and planning. We can't forget about the framework that would guide a lot of this and being able to navigate those policy contexts and advocate for the integration of NBS. And then, of course, learning while doing and learning with others. So collaboration, platforms like these, something that we're working quite closely called the Regional Community of Practice. And we will be having an event quite soon on that. So watch out for that from our website. Which then brings together experiences like what we've had from Nana Kwesi from Ghana, experiences from other countries, from communities, from public servants, etc. And we start to build on this pool of knowledge and actually ensure that we have a strong pool of authentically African knowledge on nature-based solutions. So those are some of the thoughts I have around practitioners and the competencies we can build to work very successfully with communities to implement nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I like what you said about learning, always learning. I mean, exactly, this is what we're doing here today. Marion, I'd like to ask you a question. How have stakeholders been able to apply the lessons and the tools and the resources obtained from projects like we heard today, the Karibi project, the UNA Natural Assets project, etc. And how have they been able to sustain this in light of political and economic changes?
Thank you even for having me on this panel. I think one of the things that, and I'll talk now as a policymaker from the government side, one of the things that I would like to mention is really looking at the impact that when things remain undone, like if you have informal settlements like we saw in Kibera with poor drainage, with a lot of garbage, looking at it and recognizing the negative effect that this has even on climate change. Many times those things will go unhandled but hardly do we think of the negative impact that that is having. And then I think secondly, how stakeholders have also been able to apply lessons is recognizing that government cannot really be able to solve some of these challenges on its own. Of course, if you look at how policies have evolved over time, a lot of governments, especially in Africa, it was their mandate to even be able to address some of these issues and to offer service. But unfortunately, today we know, and it is a fact, that government cannot be able to do this on its own. And this again now ties on what I would want to say thirdly, and I think something that Regina has also mentioned, the issue of collaboration and having integrated meaningful collaboration that enables us to be able to address. Like for us as Nairobi County, we are partnering with the KDI in a project we are calling the Urban Fabric Initiative that is actually going to address community issues, open issue, a community-led initiative that will promote community urban space. So working with partners and in a meaningful way. We have also done another project where we brought on board about 42 partners in Mukuru as Nairobi County government, where we did planning of Mukuru in an integrated manner, what we are calling the Mukuru SPA. And that is a good demonstration to us that we really cannot be able to do these things on our own. And then fourthly is looking at what communities are doing even on their own and really learning from that. And I would say, like, if we look at some of the initiatives that communities have been able to do along Nairobi River, we have seen a lot of initiatives on solid waste. We've seen a lot of initiatives on planting trees and even cleaning the area of the river that lies along, especially some of the informal settlements. I think recognizing some of these initiatives that communities are doing and really supporting communities, because we always say that it's actually sometimes, we know it is a wearer of the shoe who knows where it hurts. And communities are really also doing some of these things on their own. So how do we even as government, how do we even as civil society recognize and embrace what communities are doing so that we can also be able to ensure sustainability?
Sorry, my fingers are giving me trouble. I was just saying thank you so much, Marion. That was really great, the inputs from yourself. I'm going to move over now to Dr. Amanda Adoy. And my question to you, Doctor, is what are the current trends in gender mainstreaming in development initiatives in Ghana, but also Africa broadly, if you want? And do you feel that women have better access to resources and or improved participation in decision making generally? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I think currently, based on international development and the interrelatedness of global discourse around gender equality, we have a number of gender mainstreaming activities ongoing on the African continent and in Ghana. So at the African level, for example, we have AU having policies on gender and gender mainstreaming, which all the countries are adopting. And so when you bring it down to the various country level, we have institutions, governments, including issues around gender in their policies, in their constitutions, on how women and men need to be engaged. We have, in Ghana, for example, our labor policy makes provisions for family-friendly benefits for women, maternity leave. We also have institutions that are even trying to introduce paternity leave. At the AU level, we also have now there's a discourse to address gender-based violence in mainstreaming issues around positive masculinities. So we are looking at how engaging men at a positive perspective will help address issues of gender inequality. We also have the political level where we are making provisions for women to be able to participate equally as men in leadership positions and occupying political spaces in our various countries. At the educational level, so Ghana is trying to introduce an affirmative action policy, or like currently we have a bill that we are hoping to be passed into law, which will make sure that at least we have 30% of women representation at our various MMDAs and also at the national levels and in various institutions. We have to this end, and also because of the SGDs and a lot of awareness around it, we also have practical mainstreaming approaches we may not necessarily be written down. So people are practicing at their religious spaces. Now even churches are trying to make sure that women occupy certain positions as religious leaders, which hitherto was a taboo in some institutions. We also have at the traditional level where we have various spaces created for women and men.
Dr. Amanda, have we lost you? Hello? I think we might have lost Dr. Amanda Odoi. I'm going to move back to you, sir, Nana Kwesi. I have another question for you. As a leader in the Ogogo Traditional Council, what are the advantages to your specific community? You talked a little bit earlier about the impacts and benefits, but I was also wondering what sort of additional resources would you need to help your community and projects like this have a better uptake and impact?
Thank you. The biggest asset we need is resources to do a lot of orientation. Most of our people have not really.
Sorry, I had a challenge with my internet. Sorry.
Hi.
Yes,
can you
hello.
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, I had a bit of a challenge with my internet.
I'll come back to you a little later. We
Okay.
thought we'd lost you, so I've just handed over to Nana Kwesi, but now we are losing him. So can you hear us? We seem to have some connectivity issues here. Dr. Odoi, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
I see we've now lost Nana Kwesi. So let me hand back to you. So we'll go back to the gender mainstreaming issue. You were talking to us about the awareness around the SDGs. We heard that part and how you're beginning to see it even in the churches and at the traditional level. So please go ahead.
Yes, so and then at the policy level, we have, for example, the climate change policy in Ghana, for example, brings a gender perspective to it. What is happening right now is the fact that these mainstreaming efforts have largely focused on women. So there seems to be a bit of a backlash that if we're talking about gender mainstreaming, then we are supposed to be looking at this from a comprehensive approach where we look at men's issues as well. And also the limitations, for example, if you're looking at gender mainstreaming in issues of climate change, and climate change is going to affect both women and men, then there are consequences if men's issues are left out. Also, the connectivity between men's vulnerable position and its implication for women's rights. So if women are empowered and men are left out, they are more likely to use abuse as a form of reinstating their masculinity, so it has implication for men. So what the questioning around gender mainstreaming is how to look at men's issues and mainstream them alongside women's issues to ensure that there are no negative consequences for mainstreaming women's issues largely into what we have. When you take climate change also, we realize that when it comes to issues of gender mainstream, we've actually looked at it only from the agric sector. Largely our focus has been on how to make sure that women's agricultural practices are not happening, are addressed, and the challenges that they face are taken into consideration. But then climate change affects other sectors of health and all that. So how are we going to mainstream some of these gender issues around climate change in other sectors such as health and work and all that are some of the things that we are currently doing on the African continent. So I think I'll end it here, and if there are any further.
But thank you. We can always come back to you later. I see. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Odoi. I see Nana Kwesi, you are back. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
You can continue. We lost you for a while there, but you can go back. I'm sorry about this connection.
Yeah, I was saying the biggest resource we need is to empower our communities, our stakeholders, our opinion leaders to come to realize that what we are doing to ourselves in our various economies or our various communities is having a toll on the whole nation. Most of what some of them are doing is winning sand from the lagoon and then the sea, causing the sea waves to come in on stream. Currently, the government is putting stones to block the sea waves. If we don't educate people and then we allow these things to go on, by the time we realize the whole sea will overtake our land. So if we could get a lot of resources to do orientation, to go into the communities and then give them one-on-one orientation for them to understand what we are doing that is not the best, I think that would be the biggest resource we can ever get.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm actually going to go back now to you, Dr. Odoy. I want to talk a little bit about how we can leverage research and other tools to enhance community engagement and commitment in such initiatives. I think the point that Nana Kwesi just made around orientation and empowering communities is a nice sort of patch to respond to the point of research.
Yes. I think research is very important to how we'll be able to identify what issues. Nana mentioned that there's sand winning. So we find out what is the reason for which people are winning sand, especially along the coast, what is missing, because if that wasn't done previously, then what is happening now? I think one way we can leverage on research to be able to identify the issues we are interested in and making sure that we preserve and restore urban natural assets is to make sure that we engage community-based approach, community action research and participatory approaches in identifying the issues and the challenges that the people that we are dealing with are facing. So what are the challenges? What do we need as a solution? Must not come from implementers, but then to be able to harness it from the community and how they want it, because we have traditional norms, we have rules and regulations that people abide by more importantly than the national levels. So how do we engage academia and other stakeholders such as community members to be able to do this? Beyond the research phase, after we find these issues and how to communicate them, how do you want us to communicate the issues? Is around first is language. In which language are we going to communicate this issues? Are we going to do it in a language that the people understand, can relate to? Also is where do we engage these community members? It's great if you can bring everybody together as in a stakeholder meeting, but I think one important way is to have focus group specific dissemination of information. So what did we find about women and how we communicating this to women's group? What did we find about traditional leaders? How we communicating their role to them? And also, what did we find to be important that everybody must know is very critical. And we also have to make sure that in this kind of research is inclusive of from children upwards, because if we are talking about issues of sustainability and knowledge transfer and all that, how do we make sure that it cuts across all levels? And co-creation of the knowledge, co-creation of methodology for collecting the data are some of the ways we can leverage on research and then the tools that are available for us to be able to make sure that we have solutions that will be appreciated and accepted by the people we are dealing with.
Thank you so much. And you've actually touched on a number of things, and I want to move back now to Marion, working in Nairobi City County. I mean, from your perspective, and then once we're done with Marion, I'm going to ask the same question actually to Regina as a practitioner. The points that have been coming out now from the just the whole issue of community action, community-based research, identifying challenges and issues, the whole issue around using norms, but the very important point that Dr. Adao made at the end here around language and communication and how we communicate with our communities, with the different role players. It's not just the communities, it's also the opinion makers, the decision makers, the leaders within government, outside of government, churches. Somebody talked about the churches earlier. How we engage them, and what is the language that we speak. I know that we often hear that in many cases the language is too technical, and it's sort of removed from the value system. So what is your experience and your advice on that side? And then the other thing that I'm very interested in is this whole point about the methodologies for gathering data and what we do about that data. So Marion, over to you. What is your experience and what are your views on these topics?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll touch on the question of language, and this of course will also indicate how we have also ensured that our projects are inclusive, especially of the community. Allow me to give you an example of how we have handled the Kenya Informal Settlements Improvement Project, where we have the institutional structure includes a project team at the county level, but we also have a settlement executive team, which is we call the SEC. In short, we call it the SEC. And this settlement executive team comprises of various stakeholders, women, youth, men, churches, civil society, etc., persons with disability, widows, people living with HIV. It is a real inclusive team that represents the community in all the projects where we are doing informal settlements upgrading. So in terms of language, I know language can be a barrier, especially when you look at people who are less educated in the informal settlements. But we in Kenya, we have a national language, Kiswahili, and all of us speak Kiswahili. Very few people do not speak Kiswahili. So we as public servants also will speak Kiswahili when we go for our meetings with the community. And in cases where we have people who are not able to speak Kiswahili, we will actually be able to get translators who can be able to speak. So language may be a barrier, yes, but we always ensure that we are able to handle that when we are, so that we can also be able to have a win-win situation. The community speaking to us and we speaking to them as well. The other question is on data. Yeah, because we know that data is a main issue, and we also recognize that data is a big issue even for us. Even for me as a person in charge of housing today, I know if an investor came and asked me, Marion, what is the actual gap even in housing supply in Nairobi? That is an issue we have even noted, and we are actually working towards collecting data in Nairobi so that anyone who comes in will be able to have data. But allow me to say this, for our projects, like even what we are doing with UFI, or even our infrastructure projects in the informal settlement, the initial aspect for us is always to do a socio-economic survey. So all our the projects that we are doing, whether it's with the World Bank, whether it's with KDI, whether it is with AFD, before we do any meaningful upgrading, because remember, we also need to plan our settlements. And I know planning is one of the things that we are even using to change even the way policy has been handled. So even as we plan our informal settlements, the socio-economic mapping becomes very, very key. And of course, the socio-economic mapping is what will always give us issues of population, issues of the social strata, how many women, what are their levels of income, their levels of education. So to me, data is the starting point before you are even able to do any meaningful intervention, be it in an informal settlement or even in a formal settlement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marion. I just want to, before we close this part of the discussion with you, I just want to find out, how do you gather that data in the community? Is it, do you send staff in? Do you use the community itself to, train community? We've seen some projects elsewhere. For example, here in South Africa, we had a project where they trained community members, and they used technology, cell phone technology, for example, to feed data into an early warning fire system in the forestry sector. So I'd be interested to know how you actually gather that data when you do your socioeconomic mapping.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'll give an example of a project we did recently, supported by the World Bank. And here we actually trained. Of course, sometimes we collect data using consultants, but of late we are collecting data using the community itself, because they are better placed to even know whether the data we are collecting is right or wrong. In one of the settlements where we collected data recently, there's a project we are calling Digital Public Works, and we trained the community, and the community identified the youth. And we asked them, one of the criteria that you are using is if you had a smartphone, because we trained them. They collected data using the smartphones, and this data was fed into a server. So we have also trained communities to be able to collect data, because that way you're also building their capacity, because they cannot even be able now to even get employment even somewhere else where they can actually assist even consultants to collect data. So we have used different approaches, but of late, we have actually trained communities to collect data even using technology. So that is something we have tested, and it has worked. And it's something I think we need to replicate even in other informal settlements, or even as we collect data for the Nairobi housing market.
That's fantastic. That's a really great story. And I love the many co-benefits. You know, you're using your youth, you're using your community, it's creating skills for getting employment elsewhere. So let me go over back to Regina. So you've heard all this discussion, and from your perspective and the work that you've done both in the two projects that you mentioned. And then I'm going to ask, you know, how have you what has your experience been around the communication issue? You did touch on it a little bit in your presentation, but always also language, and then this very interesting discussion around data.
Okay, thank you. So I think my starting point, I think, is even starting in-house for us as KDI. So having mentioned that we're a multidisciplinary team, it means that internally, when we sit together as community organizers, social workers, landscape architects, if the landscape architects are talking about something that the rest of us don't understand, then there's a problem. So ensuring that internally there's an understanding, so there's a simplification of language, so that when we go out, we're communicating the same thing as a team. And so that is the benefits of having people with different expertise, technical, but also in-house, we have members of the community working as staff as well. So that also helps us to understand the community a little bit more intimately, knowing that Konkui means to understand something intimately, and be able to speak to them in the language that they understand. And language is not always just Kiswahili or English, but it's understanding the nuances, the context, and the experiences of the people that we are going to work with. So that's the first step. Then secondly, working very closely with community groups and putting them in the driving seat of how we engage with other stakeholders. So our approach also relies on a multi-stakeholder approach, where we will work with one community group, which has very many members, to drive the priority, the identification of issues, the mapping of stakeholders, co-design, etc. The agreement is that they also become the linchpin from which we mobilize other stakeholders who may not be engaged as often, but are critical to the success of the project. So they are the ones who would be sent out to communicate with the chief, to communicate with the local government, to communicate with structure owners, the elders, to even identify who is missing from the table. So if we don't have women, or we have women, but we don't have widows, they're the ones who would identify, help us pick them out, and make sure that those voices also feature in that. Then our co-design processes also try to ensure that we capture all these different diversities in the community, which means that our methods must also be appropriate. So when working with the children, then we deploy use of toys or bricks like Legos, use of song, use of pictures, allowing them to draw, to vision, to think big, and then we start to prioritize. And being able to adapt this also for the adults as well. So for the youth, the men, the women, and the mixed groups, understanding, I think Marion pointed out that there's also varying levels of education and understanding of language. So being able to use creative ways with which to engage and communicate with the community. Then the third thing I think that I think is useful is in the work that we were doing around NBS. I think early last year, we also had a few focus group discussions, recognizing that NBS seems as a foreign concept, but it might not be as foreign in African neighborhoods as we think it is. So we had conversations with people in Kibera, and for us, it was clear that while we had been implementing NBS, the residents' understanding of the concept was a little bit limited. However, interestingly, the practices are very relatable. So if you link it to practice, then they can relate to it. So after doing, I think, several iterations of co-design, co-implementation, and post-intervention management of NBS in the neighborhoods, residents living around those sites had gained a relatively good understanding of the concept, and they even came up with their own definition of NBS. And I think a colleague of mine even wrote, an article around this. I think Martha wrote an article about this called Doing Things God's Way. And in Kiswahili, it was njia za kimungu, meaning God's ways. So for them, they framed the concept that referencing their spiritual and religious beliefs and values, nature originates from God. So if we are going to mimic nature or use things that preserve and promote nature, then we are doing things the way God intended it to be done. So doing things in God's way. So it's being adaptable and being able to, to demonstrate and to allow them to have their own definitions and to promote those definitions. We find that very useful, and bringing in culture and history and allowing it to be an open discussion that is all encompassing has been very useful for us. And it's something we'd like to encourage and even learn from other countries as well.
Well, thank you. I find that extremely exciting. I work globally and in a lot of countries all over the world. And this is the only part of the world where there's such a close relationship between nature, people, practices, culture, beliefs, value systems. So I really think that this is something that we as Africans need to be a lot more profiling, and really I think the rest of the world can learn a lot from us. There's a richness to the sort of work that we do when we work with nature and when we work with communities that you don't find in many parts of the world. And I mean, we're having such an amazing discussion here. I just wanted to ask you quickly, Regina, before I ask everybody the last question, the whole point about data and sort of evaluation, monitoring and learning. What is your experience? How do you deal with that in the projects that you are running?
So Frank had talked about having MEL, in fact, specifically as a standard. We know MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, should be a cross-cutting component of most of our programs and projects, but also having it as a standalone component where we are continuously and actively thinking about collecting this data and collecting this data with communities. I liked the reference that Marion made about having communities collect the data themselves and maybe start to do a little bit of preliminary analysis with them and also giving feedback. So data becomes important for us to be able to inform successive interventions, to be able to inform any advocacy around policy or practice. We also do a fair bit of work with academia, sometimes just to also influence practice, especially with evidence. And we know with government, they're more likely to listen to you if you have evidence. So providing that evidence becomes important, but also just documenting the stories. So being able to document the story of njia za kimungu and having that put out there as another way of having conversations about nature-based solutions. So for us, we had not, I don't know if we mentioned that we work through 4 service areas as KDI. So the first is building and designing, and that's working with communities to co-design, build, and construct these public spaces or put in place nature-based interventions. The second is planning and programming. So working with communities again to plan the areas that they live in, the environment, but also planning just the programs that they want to do. Then the third is advocate and educate. And the fourth, standalone, is research and testing. And for that, then data becomes very important, not just to have it as an extractive component, but a component that is co-designed with communities, co-implemented with communities, and actually adds value to their existence, their aspirations, their dreams, and the things that they want to do, but also is able to transform their environment by informing others that could have a role to play in doing that.
Thank you. And I think that on that very important point that you made about it not just being extractive, but value adding, I think it's a very important point. And I'm going to use that as the sort of lever for the last question to everybody. And my last question is, looking forward now, we've looked a lot at what's happening and where we've come from and how we've progressed. But if we were to move forward and looking ahead, in respect of using nature-based solutions, working with communities, the importance of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous practices, and the projects and the programs that we run in our African cities and in African countries, what do you think needs to be prioritized when we create these enabling environments so that we can address the need for climate change adaptation and the need for nature-based solutions that really create benefits not just in terms of climate adaptation and resilience, but also from a socioeconomic point of view, livelihoods, job creation, skilling people up, and then very importantly, the space where I come from biodiversity, how we can use this to protect our natural resources. We heard earlier about the sand mining and the sea, and so for me, it's also important that we actually do things in a way that protects our natural assets. So let's start with Dr. Odoi. What are the 2 or 3 things that you think we should prioritize moving forward?
Thank you. I believe that a whole lot is being done, but one thing that we always have to be conscious about is the fact that gender underpins every other activity that we undertake. So when we are looking at issues of gender equality, it's not just the numbers at the table, but where are they located at the table in issues of decision making, issues of representation. So in as much as there are lots of gender mainstreaming activities, for example, women do not have the same access to decision making, participation and access to the resources. So how do we make sure that we consciously incorporate all these at the various phases of our activities? For me, it's critical. And in looking at gender equality should not just be a focus on women, but the implication of focusing on women largely towards how it would inform gender relations. So we should look at the relations at the community level on the programs and how this can impact the success of the activity. Especially when we are talking about issues of data, for example. If we are talking about data, what kind of data will women understand? What kind of data will men understand? So we are more likely to have men who understand quantitative data than women. So this numbers, we found this number, but what does it mean? Where are the voices of the women? Where are the voices of the missing people in there? I think are some of the things we can consider going forward so that we make sure that whatever we do reaches every other person that we want to be reached on in dealing with these issues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. Did you want to say something else?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The same question, please, to Marion.
Okay, thank you. I think for me, my 2 points on what needs to be prioritized. I think number 1 for me is recognizing the critical role of planning, because all these things, whether it's doing projects, whether it's bringing communities on board, whether it is seeking finance, they all have to be undertaken on a plan. And I mean, most of our settlements, for example, are not planned. So I think embracing planning and looking at planning as one of the critical things that must be done to shape the way our cities look, to shape the way our settlements look. I think to me that is key. Then number 1, it is the issue of integrating partners and integrating in terms of not just resource, but integrating in terms of what are our thoughts, what are the resources that we can be able to bring together, what value, what synergies can we really be able to bring together, because we realize that there are a lot of stakeholders who are doing things on their own. And so we end up having a lot of duplication. So integrating partners based on the plans that you already have, especially for our settlements, I think to me that would go a long way, even in addressing these issues that have an impact of climate change. Because a lot of our partners have their own resources. So if we're able to bring these resources together, I think that would be able to make a meaningful change. And I think those are my 2 main points.
Thank you. Thanks, that's really great. I'm going to hand this question now to Regina. The priorities from your perspective going forward.
I want to link this, I think, to a question you'd asked Nana Kwesi earlier around what resources are needed. And I think for me, before you get to the resource that is financial, it's the people, looking at the people as a resource. And in looking at the people as a resource is then investing, providing agency, providing platforms for people in whatever space they occupy, to be able to engage, to drive the agenda, to make decisions, to plan, to implement, and to do that. So for me, the priority is, and I have a bias, of course, for communities in particular. So that's where, for me, the priority would be that having communities be front and center in any development program, whether it is driven from a civil society perspective, or it is driven from a government perspective, or from any other perspective, that having citizens or residents be at the forefront of driving that agenda, and therefore investing resources in their capacity, in their agency, in their voice, is part of creating an enabling environment, because that's what we are talking about here, an enabling environment. And that includes civic space, it includes resources, it includes everything else that accompanies it. But people must be at the forefront of that. So whether it is our policy framework that facilitates that, what you put in place must then have citizens, residents, communities at the forefront of that. So for me, that would be the priority and the thing that we continuously work to. Everything else we bring must be to drive, to have them driving, in the driving seat.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, I ask that question to you, Sir Nana Kwesi. What are your priorities going forward, please? Nana Kwesi, are you with us still? Can you hear? I think we might have lost Nana Kwesi. I'm just going to, we do have some time now for questions. So let us, while we try and connect again with Nana Kwesi, we have lost him. Let's see whether we have some time now for questions and answers from the floor. I just want to see whether we have any questions. There have been some questions in the chat box. Are there any new questions from the floor? If you can just raise your hand using the hand figure in the on the Zoom floor. Let's just see. Any questions? Guys, can you just help me with questions? Nobody wants to take the floor from the audience? Frank, there was a question to you. Do you maybe, while we see if there are any more, because I hear that the network in Ghana there's been a power outage, so I'm not sure that we're going to get Nana Kwesi back. But if you could maybe just share the question that you responded to earlier. There was a question that you responded to in the chat box. Are they?
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question around how we manage participation and how the methods we use to ensure that there is adequate participation and also inclusive participation. I think the response around that would be, there is obviously difficulties in getting full participation, especially from the unrepresented groups. And we've over time tried different methods and improved on the methods of participation. One, by ensuring that participation is voluntary and open to everyone to participate, and the venue is disclosed well ahead of the event, including sharing posters and sending messages to participants. We've also engaged participants directly in mobilization. One, we start by the initial workshops, and in subsequent ones, we ensure that we do participate the mapping of the stakeholders with the participants, asking them who do you think would have been the right people to be represented in these sessions. And in the subsequent sessions, we then ensure that the community takes part in ensuring there is representation from those stakeholders identified. Other than that, we also target the stakeholders and also go and look for them, especially with local authorities.
Thank you. I see that we might have Nana Kwesi back, but there is a question in the Nana Kwesi, are you back with us?
Yeah.
Oh, great. While we have you, would you like to respond to that question about what to prioritize going forward? And then I'll respond to the last question in the chat box. Thank you.
I would have loved that, as the other speaker said, I'm thinking of community-based, having a one-on-one talk with our indigents to let them really appreciate the issues that we are faced with, the climatic change. We are the coastal area, so if we don't do our things very well, we are going to experience very catastrophic issues. So my priority will be having the opportunity to have an engagement with all the stakeholders, those who are into planning, those who are into the main implementation like the Metropolitan Assembly, and then traditional rulers, those of us who have lands and we are giving it away. We should be made to know where we have to give out and where we don't have to give out. As I said, when you come to all swampy areas now, which was mainly left for flooding, now most people are filling those places to do projects, which we think is nice now, but in the near future, it's going to create problems. So my priority is to have a serious engagement with the communities and those who are the real implementers of the day-to-day activities in our communities.
Wise words. So we have one last question, and I think this would probably be to KDI, but maybe also Marion, if in your city you have experience of this. And the question is, artificial intelligence and group intelligence, how has this impacted your work, specifically when creating prediction models? Who would like to venture a response to that question? Someone from KDI, Franklin, Regina?
Yes, I can respond to that question. Well, particularly in terms of group intelligence. So this is where I think you look at, this question is around the wisdom of the crowd. So I think one of the things you find with that is that if you can get a diverse group of people who are not particularly experts in a topic, you're likely to get some accurate feedback on the question. So I think one of the things we rather benefit from is the diverse group of people that we get to involve consistently, not in just one engagement, but a bit more number of engagements. And that helps us also get like responses to particular topics that we're engaging in. So I think that's probably where we benefit from group intelligence through that participation, the participatory process of engaging a diverse and inclusive group of people.
Thank you so much. Marion, any response from yourself?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think in terms of artificial intelligence, not so much, but group intelligence, as Franklin says, looking at the group dynamics, allowing groups to give their views through a system. And basically, I think public participation generally promotes group dynamics. And in Kenya, for example, public participation is now enshrined in law. It is mandatory. In fact, it is illegal if you do not engage the public in terms of public participation. That is now a law in Kenya. It's in our constitution. We also have, in Nairobi County, we have a Public Participation Act. So it actually promotes the group intelligence, because that way we're able to get feedback. And even if it's not, like anytime we have a public participation forum, we always allow people to give their feedback, even if they're not there in person. There are always channels where they can be able to give their feedback. So, but in terms of artificial intelligence, not so much, but group intelligence, that we are doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions. Franklin has put up some more information around what they've done with validating outputs from two-dimensional flood modeling through participatory mapping. Yeah, that's been specifically in the Kaberia project. So one last question. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I'm going to do the wrap up now. I think that seems to be the end. I hope I haven't missed some. Ah, wait, there's a, and let's just see if it's a question or a comment. Oh, it was just a comment. Thank you. Right. Amanda, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was just thinking about the discussions around artificial intelligence and how we're not so much using it right now. And I think that going forward, it's maybe these projects have to bring on board persons with skills in artificial intelligence and predicting and programming, so that we can harness as much as possible with the big data that we have to make sure that the work gets done. So if we haven't looked at this, it's time for us to consider these in our activities.
Absolutely, and it's a very interesting field. I mean, for somebody in my generation, it's quite a scary thing. But I do know that there's some amazing stuff around there. We were just recently had a presentation on what they called digital twinning. And this involves creating a digital twin of the city and doing all of your planning and your predictions and your modeling on the digital twin to see how it will affect the city going forward. So there's some really interesting technologies. And as you say, Amanda, we need those skills out there. I'm going to do the wrap up now. There is a lot to be wrapped up about, because we've had a very, very rich discussion. And then when I've done the wrap up, I'm not going to be able to do justice to all of you, but I just wanted to highlight some of the key messages that we got from the session. Certainly, these are my takeaway messages. I think some of the early messages that we were getting was the value and the importance of this is not something that government can do alone, but we certainly need to collaborate with all our partners, all our stakeholders. A lot of our panelists and our speakers talked about how important communities are and looking at what the communities do. They know best, they are in touch with the issues on the ground. They're very important role players when it gets to gathering data, identifying needs, and also in terms of monitoring and evaluation. We had a very interesting debate and discussion around gender mainstreaming and how important it is not just to look at it from the perspective of women, but also to look at the impacts of empowering women and how this affects the men, and that we need to have a balance and an equity there. And the fact that, for example, when we talk about how we want to take these things forward and what is important, what are the resources that are important, I think the one thing that I picked up here is a point that Nana Kwesi and several others of you kept repeating, is the fact that we need to empower our communities. We need to give them agency. They are our opinion leaders. We need to have a look at what is happening and so that they can understand what the impacts are of many of the projects and initiatives which may seem to have short-term quick benefits, but in the long run can be more detrimental. And if there's a better understanding at the community level of this, and a better understanding of the values and the sort of benefits of Indigenous practices and Indigenous knowledge, different decisions may have been taken. We talked about research, the importance of community-based and orientated action research. We had some very exciting, interesting examples from Nairobi of how with a housing settlement and infrastructure projects, how inclusive this is, and the issue of language is used, and there again the point came out about using communities for data purposes. And we started looking at the need for using the whole sort of methodology and approach of co-design and what value that has. And then towards the end here, the sort of going forward, the one message was we need to look at gender. That is central to everything, but it needs again to be a balanced approach. And the planning, the critical role that planning plays and can shape in defining how our environments are in the future, and the importance of integrating all our partners, because instead of duplicating effort, we need to do things together. And often partners have resources that if we pool those resources, it will supplement resources that government has, or maybe an NGO, etc. And that we see our communities as probably the most important resource, and that they are at the forefront and at the center of everything that we do. And again, the point around how communities, if they are empowered, if they have agency, how they can make wise decisions going forward. So with this, I hope I've given justice to the depth and the richness of this debate and the discussion that we've had today. The last thing that I have to do is just to thank all of you, the participants. It's been a long session. There's been a lot of information that we have shared here today. But especially I want to thank our speakers, the 3 presentations that we have, and to say I'm sorry that it was so short. You know, these things we can always carry on and talk more and more about these amazing projects that we see in our continent. And then a big word of thanks to all of our panelists. I think that the time you have taken out today to share your insights, to share your knowledge, to share your experiences with everybody here has been really very valued. I have certainly enjoyed this as a great session, and I hope everybody else has. And I think it has done testimony to the fact that, you know, collectively, there is so much information, and somebody, in fact, I think a few of the panelists made the point, and speakers made the point, that we need to learn more. We need to understand better. And I'm hoping that this webinar today has helped us all. I certainly have learned more and understand better how complex this is and how important it is. I think our communities within our continent and our cities are the ones that are the most affected by climate change. And I'm hoping that through the discourse today, we all have learned more. So with that, thank you to all of you, to Nana Kwezi for your time. I know as a traditional leader, you're a busy man, so we really appreciate you being here. Marian Rono, as an official, I know that you two also have a busy program. Thank you. Dr. Amanda Odoy, thank you for your time out. Regina, Franklin, my colleague Bongi, I hope I haven't missed anybody. And just to say, in the back room here, the technical team, you guys have done an amazing piece of work. I'm sorry that we've had some technical glitches, and that in a sense is something that in our continent we can also certainly do. There's a resource, the connectivity that we have, and the fact that many people out there, many of our communities don't have this connectivity. And I'm very grateful for the fact that we're seeing more and more use through projects, through cities like Nairobi of our youth and their smartphones, because that's the way to go. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I am going to say goodbye to you all. Thanks.